Hello, it's Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist. Thank you for tuning in again. And I was browsing through Atheist Experience old episodes, and I noticed there was an episode where John Lacoletti and Jen Peeples. John was hosting and Jen was the co-host. So I saw this, I thought, not two of the strongest on the Atheist Experience, and I wondered how it would go exactly. So I had a listen, and I was horrified, to be honest with you. It went far worse than I imagined. And I very rarely claim that I can do better than any debaters, or, that I don't think I would. I think if I was on the Atheist Experience, I wouldn't last long. I've got too many gaps in my knowledge in terms of apologetics, and it's why really I never offered to do it. But on this occasion, well, I mean, obviously not that my offer would have a hope of being accepted, but looking at what happened in this episode, I honestly do believe I would have dealt with these calls better than John and Jen would have done. It's quite horrifying, really, but let's go through. Will's calling in. He called in really to try and debunk evolution, and so they spent about sort of 10 minutes on that. And it's clear the guy knows hardly anything at all. But then they moved on to other areas, and really it was very painful to listen to. So let's go through and just see what happened here.
Your reasons for believing in the Christian God were not very good. So just something to think about.
I just think, from my looking at these, I think from a worldview perspective, there are aspects of those religions that don't stand up to critical thinking.
Well, of course, he's a Christian. And of course, I mean, whatever religion you happen to hold as true, you will naturally feel that all the others are lacking in some way. So he's a Christian saying that. There are Muslims who are saying that Christianity doesn't stack up. Hindus are saying that neither Christianity nor Islam stacks up. Buddhists are saying the same about all the Western religions, and all the Western religions are saying that about the Eastern religions and also about each other. It's the whole point that if you hold any one particular religious view, naturally you will think that the rest don't stack up. So the unique thing about atheists is we think no religions stack up, and we haven't got a religion, and atheism is not a religion. It's virtually just a rejection of all other religions.
And we think none of them stand up to critical thinking.
Well, that's a kind of a harsh.
Well, it's not a harsh thing to say. It's a fair thing to say. And doesn't he realize he's calling the Atheist Experience and that gods are not believed in?
Harsh position. Why do you think that?
Well, I'm a former Christian, and I rejected those beliefs because they didn't stand up to reason and evidence. So
okay.
After that,
It's funny. I mean, he's acting as if he's phoning up some kind of just a sort of general debating line, and not understanding the whole reason behind the show is to explain the atheist response to theist claims.
Investigated many other religious traditions and found them all equally lacking. But the reality is I was raised a Christian, and once you go through the process of rejecting the beliefs that you were indoctrinated to believe for your whole life, basically that's like the strongest argument you have, and everything else after that is a weaker argument. So the more I investigated other religions, the weaker and weaker they all got. So at some point you get down the list and you're like, okay, everything beyond this is even weaker.
That doesn't quite follow, because I was brought up in Christianity, and when I was 15, 16, I rejected Christianity. But I later found out about another religion which I felt made much better sense than Christianity, so it doesn't quite follow. And by the way, that religion was Zen. To me it sounded, or at least one thing I liked about Zen was it didn't have a god. There was no sort of doctrines to believe in or anything like that, and a lot of the material I was reading around it made a lot more sense to me than Christianity. So that doesn't quite follow. what Jen is saying there. Although I understand where she's coming from, that if you're brought up in a particular society, then those religions which are sort of culturally furthest away from you are even less likely to make sense. I agree with her from that point of view.
Weaker than stuff I've already rejected, so why keep going?
I guess, and I would say I went through a critical assessment of my own faith as well.
Yeah, well, it failed, didn't it? This is, I remember Matt saying recently that if you think you're a critical thinker, if you think you're a skeptic and you end up in theism, it's a failure of critical thinking and a failure of skepticism.
And I came out of that with the very firm conviction that it was true, that there was reason and there was rationality behind it.
What was it, Will? What was it that convinced you, if you can say briefly?
Well, I mean, this is one good thing that John did in this show, that he asked at exactly the right time, what was it that convinced you? Why do you believe?
It may not be possible, but what did you think?
I think
no, don't let him off the hook. This is what I don't like. He asks the question, why do you believe? And then he says, well, I know it might not be possible to answer. Why does he do these things? Why don't you just say why? Don't let people off the hook.
I think a believer should be able to say that in an elevator speech.
Well, then say it. Don't cut the preamble and get on with it.
It is a lot of things. It's not just one thing.
Oh, well, go on, get on with it.
But I first looked at what I consider to be the evidence for Jesus Christ's historical.
You realize how dishonest he is. I mean, he's going to say later on that evolution and science, etc., is not the actual reason he believes, and he's already implied that he was already a believer for other reasons, not for because evolution's false, or not because of cosmology or all these other reasons. All the reading he's done, people typically already believe because of a personal experience, or this whole existence just doesn't make sense, there must be a God. I just can't get my head around it. I'm going to be a theist. And then they start going out and looking at creationism. They start looking at intelligent design, etc., etc. They start finding these occasional scientists who've turned their back on the scientific method and decided to embrace theism. And then they use this to prop up their already irrational belief.
Historical existence, and then looking at Christianity's birth and how that came to be established, that has a logical resonance to it, in my view.
I wish you would elaborate. What logical resonance does the birth of Christianity have to it? And what about the historical existence of Jesus? How does that prove the resurrection?
That doesn't say it's absolutely true, but there are, there's certainly documents and a lot.
Well, nobody's asking for absolute truth. What we're looking for is a sufficient reason to believe.
Documents, and those are.
I can't believe it. They're sitting there like two dummies and not saying a word. This is as far as I'm concerned, this episode was a disaster.
Are accepted by most historians. I studied Bart Ehrman's stuff.
It's not accepted by most historians. If this nonsense was accepted by historians, they would be teaching it as history in the classroom. You go and pick up any encyclopedia of world history. You go and pick up any, you go to the universities and they've got row upon row of books. You go and look for Jesus, the resurrection, any of this. None of it's there. None of it is in the history section. All of it is in the theology section. Why? Because it's not history.
For a while too, and I find his to be a little bit out of the main line. So I don't.
Yeah, well, of course, Bart Ehrman's an atheist, New Testament scholar. And, of course, Christians don't like what he's got to say about their holy book.
I think there are folks that have reason to doubt it, but I don't think they're doubting.
Again, they're just sitting there letting him make point after point. I honestly, if I was the director of Yeah. If I was the director of the Atheist Experience and I saw this episode, if I had any power, I would never, well, I would certainly make sure that they were never hosting an episode again, that there had to be a really strong host in a show to avoid this kind of disaster.
Their reasons are real good. I think, quite honestly, science, I think, backs up God. Cosmology.
Science backs up God. Why don't you say something?
I think backs up that theory. I think evolution. I don't want to get in a long discussion of evolution like we just had.
Well, but the thing is, if cosmology points to a God, why is it that most cosmologists don't believe in a God?
Well, that's the wrong question, Jen. What you should have been saying is, in what way does science back up God? Rather than kind of going for this sort of reverse argument from authority. You should be saying, if people make a claim that science proves God, there's no good saying, well, most scientists don't believe in God, because then you start arguing, well, how do you know most scientists don't believe in God? Have you got, all the analysis there? Have you got the statistics? And well, not really. Well, then how can you say that? No, if somebody claims science backs up God, you've got to say, what is it about science that backs up God?
Well, I don't think that's true.
That is true.
In fact, I doubt. I don't think that's true at all.
That is absolutely true. Most cosmologists do not believe in a God. So
I have read that.
Well, obviously it's true that most cosmologists don't believe in God, but I consider that to be irrelevant, as I would consider it to be irrelevant if most cosmologists did believe in God. The only thing that matters is the evidence.
Most, you mean more than 50%?
I mean, like over 90% of them don't believe in a personal God or a God, period.
I'm not the statistic keeper on cosmologist faith, but I have read a number of cosmologists that are believers. And maybe they're the minority and I just read them. But
well, actually, you know something? This caller actually said a sensible thing. In 25 minutes, he actually said one sensible thing. He said maybe the cosmologists that he's reading are the ones who are the believers, and he doesn't know the statistics. He has actually got the potential to be a critical thinker.
Don't see a lot of folks that are saying things that I mean it.
Well, look, go into the university bookshop, ask for the section of cosmology. You won't find any cosmologists who are writing about cosmology from a theological angle. You won't find any. This is a specialist market. It's a specialist populist market where there are cosmologists on both sides of the argument, but they're a tiny minority of the overall number of cosmologists in the world who are doing that work. Tiny number. Most of them don't give a damn about the theological questions.
The logic of it even makes sense, that space-time, matter all came into existence.
Okay, how does the logic make sense? All you did was say space-time and matter, and the logic makes sense. How does it make sense? You can't just say space-time and matter and, quantum theory and strings theory, and it all makes sense.
If it were the case, then the cosmologists would be, at least acknowledging that, hey, this points to a God, and they're not. They're overwhelmingly saying, that they don't think it points to a God. So these are the people closest to the science who don't believe.
Yeah, I've read some of the science too, and they think it does point to.
Yeah, well, he's already conceded that maybe he's just reading cosmologists and scientists who believe in God.
A God. So it just depends which cosmologist you read, I think.
Well, exactly. Well, again, he said another true thing. But how can we tell which set of cosmologists are most accurately representing the true nature of things? Or can we not conclude from either set?
Or if you're willing to accept the consensus of people in the field.
I'm not a
Well, I would never accept. I would never accept a consensus view on a truth claim of the nature of the existence of God. I would never accept consensus. I would want to examine the evidence myself.
enough of a cosmologist to know what the large body is, but I've read a good amount on it, and it seems to be consistent that it is supportive of a major creation type event.
Well, the question is, how does science support a major creation event?
And I just want to leave it at that.
Well, of course he wants to leave it at that, because there's no way that he can expand upon it. He hasn't got the knowledge. He hasn't got the evidence.
There's a number of things. I think that you made the statement a while ago that there's no evidence for design in nature, and yet people, atheists like Dawkins and
yeah, well, it's true. There's no evidence of design in nature. Dawkins mentioned the appearance of design, and so did Darwin, of course. But Darwin famously said, I freely admit that, the intricate workings of an organ such as the eye, would lead one to believe that it had been designed. And then he goes on to say, however, eventually he goes on to say, however, the evidence has got to lead us to another conclusion, that it was just simply a natural processes. But creationists turn to this and say, oh, look, Darwin says it's got the appearance of design. The appearance of design is one thing, real evidence for design is another. And personally, I don't think that anything in nature has the appearance of design. And as I've argued, human beings have evolved with no other purpose than basically to live, breathe, and breed. No other. We haven't got any purpose. I mean, if we were designed, we've got no purpose about us at all. We can't do anything. I mean, a watch can tell the time. A hammer can bang in nails. They were obviously designed with a particular purpose. Human beings, we're purposeless. All we do is, we breathe, we reproduce, we eat, etc. That's all.
And others warn people that study to not get fooled by the appearance of design. So there is as an engineer myself, I'm an engineer, and as an engineer myself, I look at the cell and the body and how things came about, and and I read more and more about it, and the more I read, the more I'm amazed at how it all works together from the chemical, biological.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that sense of awe at looking at something like that, that's not foreign to atheists. It's just that we don't attribute that to a God. And I mean, one of the
okay, I can't really stand any more of this. There's about another 5 or 6 minutes to go, and it's not really satisfactory at all. They let him get away with far too much. I wouldn't have, if I was on the show, I would have put a stop to this. But it's not my job, and this episode was a monumental fail. You can look at the other calls. There's somebody else who calls in, James I think his name is, and it's a similar kind of story where they let him talk and make claims without challenging, and they really need to avoid this happening and have a very strong host on, which now they have. Actually, they've got now that even though Matt's gone, they've actually got fairly good hosts on who can stand up to these rambling Christians with their unevidenced claims and their irrational fallacies, etc. So that's about it. Let me know what your opinion is. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back again with another clip soon. Bye.